You're gonna come here, make sure I got it right.
Yeah.
Have to be on video this time.
You got all dressed up, so.
Yeah, this worked out well today. Make sure your face is in my picture. Move yourself or move your chair.
Good evening.
Howie. Oh, yeah, I know who that is. If you say the
And
if you say the name of the, you have to say the name of the rabbi that one challenged the other with questions.
I can't.
No, you don't do that. What do you say?
No, I can't. There's too many. I just want to take a short example of what we would.
Right.
I mean, this whole thing, everything.
a few more people than last week.
Yeah, good.
They had this last week already.
I wasn't aware.
Yeah, we started last week, but the meeting was right in the morning, so a lot of people couldn't come.
Right. Okay.
Hi.
Hello.
Aaron, do you want to run it this evening?
Sure. I see that Michael doesn't have the link, so I'm sending it to him.
Okay.
Um, Okay, so we made a lot of progress. Well, let's just do it according to the order. Howie took on more than everyone else this week. So let's start with the first, how you
Okay.
were on Yud Bet
Yud Bet,
Amud Aleph to Yud Amud
right.
Aleph.
Right. So one of the things that was on Yud Bet Amud Aleph that I found apropos to me, at least, if for some reason you're going to take on a private fast, I tend to fast when my mother has, when I have yahrzeit for my mother. My father's yahrzeit is in Nisan, so I can't fast during Nisan, but my mother's yahrzeit is in Shvat, so I fast. As it says in the Gemara that you're supposed to fast on the parents' yahrzeit, so I fast. But the Gemara says that if in fact you're going to take on a private fast, you have to do it. And you have to verbally say that I'm going to take on a private fast, which I knew in the back of my head sometime, but I wasn't very medactic with that. And they say you're supposed to do that at when you're davening mincha, and usually at there is actually a paragraph if in fact you're that you can find it in your siddur. There's a paragraph that said you're going to take on a fast for whatever reason. Derek, you don't take on a private fast on Shabbos, except for a Tanis Chalo. That's the only one that if you have a bad dream on Friday night and you want to take on a private fast, then you can take it on Shabbos, even though you're not supposed to fast on Shabbos normally. But that's one of the things that I found that was good for me.
Good. So I see that we're missing Yoshua, Eli, Rabbi Abraham, Eliezer Schachter, Mark, and Vera. So the next in line, if all of those people are not here, is me. So the section that I dealt with is about Megillat Ta'anit. Megillat Ta'anit is a Second Temple document that listed days of celebration. And according to the Mishnah, there's a machloket about the days that are listed there, if you're allowed to fast or do a hesped on the days before and after. And there's a number of positions that are recorded, and the whole sugya is basically dealing with that. But what I found important in this section, first of all, there's parallel sugyot to this in Rosh Hashanah, so almost the whole sugya is there. But the thing that caught me is that because they were talking about this, they asked the question, so why is it that for Megillat Ta'anit, you can't fast before or after according to certain opinions, but on Shabbat and Yom Tov, you are allowed to fast before and after? So there's a Braita, Hayamim ha'elu haktuvim b'Megillat Ta'anit, lifneihem u'la'achareihem asurim, before and after are forbidden, Babetov yamim tovim asurim, lifneihem u'la'acharim mutarim, but on Shabbat and Yom Tov themselves, it's forbidden, but before and after, it's permissible. Uma hefresh ben zeh lazeh. What's the difference? So here we have the principle, halalu divrei Torah, v'divrei Torah ein tzrichim chizuk, halalu divrei sofrim, v'divrei sofrim tzrichim chizuk. So here is the idea that anything that things that are derabanan, we are actually more stringent about, we're more careful about than divrei Torah, and therefore that's why on Shabbat and Yom Tov that are divrei Torah, you can fast before and after. But Megillat Ta'anit festivals, no. But as the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah, Megillat Ta'anit b'teila. So all the days in Megillat Ta'anit were canceled out, except for Purim. That's the only day in Megillat Ta'anit that we still celebrate. Ellie, I see that you came. So we'll go back in order. So you had Yud Dalid Amud Aleph to Tet Vav Amud Aleph. You basically the end of the first parak.
Yes.
So go ahead.
Oh, I didn't know everybody has to say a shtickle. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, you can, or it's up to you. You can just say, you don't have to say anything. It's optional. It's just kind of.
Eddie, you can do it in Technicolor.
I don't have my gimmicks with me. My duff, apart from the end, which was a nice little piece of Agadah, mainly dealt with the question of if you're in a quite a topical question, if you're in a climate where the rainy season and the dry season are the other way around, we would say the southern hemisphere today, although the Gemara, strangely enough, made a difference even between and Eretz Yisrael. No, there was such a big difference in the need for rain between Babel and Eretz Yisrael. But for us, we would see more as the difference between the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere, where summer in Yisrael, in Chutz La'aretz, in the southern hemisphere. When would you be shoel Geshem? Would you be allowed to essentially apply your own seasons to decide when you say Mashiv or Ruach or Besein Talmud Matzah Bracha? So there's some discussion in the Gemara. The conclusion seems to be that we follow Eretz Yisrael. There's a bit of a machloket, but that we follow Eretz Yisrael. If a person wants to, and I guess if you're in Australia and you really needed the rain in July, because your crops needed rain in July, you could make some sort of insertion for yourself in Shema Kolenu. But the idea is not to be Meshana, the Matbea that we have. That Matbea emanated from Eretz Yisrael. So I guess if there's a lesson over here, it's the centrality of Eretz Yisrael. Whether or not most of the Jews are in Galut. Indeed, you think about it now, it seems quite sensible because almost Rov HaYehudim Ba'olam are in Eretz Yisrael. But we go back just 30, go back a century, and a tiny minority of the Jews of the world were Eretz Yisrael. But when you apply that halacha, you're applying it just because of the land of Eretz Yisrael and its kedusha, not because there were any abundant numbers of farmers in Eretz Yisrael. Today, it seems to be more logical that you would do so. It's the biggest concentration of Jews anyway. So that's an interesting idea, which is kept. And I guess it's in line with many of the other ideas that we don't change the nusach on various of things we say in Tisha B'Av. We don't change it just because we have a modern state of Israel. The nusach of tefillahs works very well. Even today, and I've mentioned this. I had a little chat with you, Rabbi Kenigsberg. We were talking again about tefillah, what you see in tefillah, and what goes around comes around, or whatever is the expression. I was saying that when we look at the Avinu Malkenos, even, and we're saying Avinu Malkeno now for Shacharis, there's a lot of them that seem especially tragic and overly frightening, which they never seem to apply to us, or they applied last 18 years ago. All of a sudden they speak to me again. We're just seeing the kidnappings, we've seen the different forms of suffering in Gaza, the real threats for the Jewish people, some of the more intense pieces of tachanun that we say, again, which we've almost dismissed from our minds as not being relevant to us, just being a vestige of the past, they suddenly come back today. So again, we see how the tefillah is appropriate. And if you wait long enough, unfortunately, in Jewish history, you find that the tefillah you thought you had passed by has suddenly become topical again. I guess I got thinking about this, and in a way it dovetails into the idea of Mashav Ruach Ameret HaGeshem, Jewish people's views, their eyes, their focus has always been on Eretz Yisrael, and even if we need rain in Chutz La'aretz, we still have to remember where the God's real seasons are, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu's eyes are, I guess those are the things I was thinking about when I was being with Siyum at Peirik.
Thanks. Okay, so the next was Paul. I think you had Yud Tet. Howie also had another section, so maybe we'll come back, Howie, to you. But first, Paul, Yud Tet to Kaf.
Okay, so it's
if you
actually
wanted to say something,
okay. Can you hear me now?
yeah.
Okay, great. So it was very appropriate that Rabbi Kenigsberg's Devar Torah between Mincha and Marav, because he's actually talked about the two parakim of Tehillim where you have a kind of like a conflict. And part of the Gemara that I learned is where they brought four instances which Rabbi Yehuda takes a positive aspect from a relatively negative verse. And I just want to share with you the four psukim. Two of them are from Eicha. The first one is Yerushalayim l'nida b'neihem, that Yerushalayim has become like a nida in your midst. So it's really something relatively negative, but he views it as being positive. Just like the nida is metame, eventually it'll become tire. So just like Yerushalayim is destroyed, we believe that it's going to come back, very soon with Meher Yamenu. The second verse is Hoyesok Almanah, that Yerushalayim is like a widow, which again you would view as a relatively negative term. But Rabbi Yehuda said it's really positive, because they're not talking about a true widow, but rather talking about someone whose husband left, went overseas, but they're going to be coming back. So just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu may have left us during the period where the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, we know that he's coming back and will bring back to us the Beis Hamikdash. The third pasuk is actually from Malachi, where it talks about V'gam ani nosati eschem nizim u'shfalim, that you've made me hated and low. And again, you would view this as being relatively negative. But Rabbi Yehuda says this is really also a bracha. Why is it a bracha? Because they don't view us so highly that they will not appoint us as being government officials or police officers, which are two categories of people that are really not very well liked. So because they despised us, they're going to like us a little bit more. I'm not sure that's true nowadays, but he viewed it as a bracha. The last one is really comparing Bnei Yisrael to a weed, to a kana that kind of sways in the wind. And again, you can view it as when the wind blows, it's going to blow it over. But the actual, if you take a look at a reed, the reed has many, many roots to it. And it's also very flexible. So while it is being blown both back and forth, it's not going to break. And when that wind stops, it will be stronger than it was before, and it will be upright. And he kind of extends this to taking, is it better to get a bracha from an enemy, or is it better to get a curse from a friend? And he ends it with that it's really better to have a curse from a friend. And he uses the example of Bilam, who was not our friend, but he gave us a bracha. He compared us to the cedar trees, which, if you know of a cedar tree, it does not have very deep roots, and when the wind blows very hard, it's going to fall over and it's not going to come back. But the kind of the curse of a friend was that we were like a kana, like a reed, and we will be coming back and we'll be stronger, and people will respect us even greater once we come back. So all these things kind of point to the fact that while we have very hard times right now, we know we're coming back, and we're going to come back stronger.
Thanks. Very nice. If your camera's on, Hillel, if you want to share something from your daf.
Sure. I also didn't know what the format was, but I had the good fortune of having a good amud and a half of pure Agadata. And for those of us who have learned in traditional yeshivas, Agadata is not something we are particularly good at, either because they chose to skip it when we were learning in yeshiva, or because they would run through it. And on the other hand, the Agadata is just so interesting and entertaining that it makes a Masechta like Tainit so worthwhile to learn. So among them, among the stories introduced here are some stories about the famous Nachum Ish Gamzu. And in that case, we're introduced to stories where the individual is just such an angelic figure that we can't figure out how to relate in any way. We can't figure out how we could potentially emulate someone like that. Or he is aided by God's miracles in such a way that, again, we're not quite sure whether or not it has what the relevance is for us. There is one story, however, which I'll share because I tried to distill something from it. And it's the story of Ilfa and Rabbi Yochanan, who were chavrutas. They were learning together. They traveled. They decided that it was time to leave the base medrash and go out and earn a living. And so they were on the road and they stopped. It happened to be within a sugya associated with walls that weren't steady and had a tendency to fall over. And they sat down to have lunch by one of these walls. And the malachim came by and said, let's finish these guys off because they're not smart enough to eat lunch in a safe place. And one of the malachim said, no, you can't do that because one of these guys is destined to be a Rosh Hashiva. He's going to be a significant player, and it's not his time to go up to the Shamayim. And Rabbi Yochanan turns to Ilfa and says, did you hear that? And Ilfa says, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And Rabbi Yochanan had heard this conversation. Ilfa did not. Rabbi Yochanan chose to go back to the yeshiva to learn, and Ilfa went off to do his thing, remaining a Talmud Chacham, which he demonstrates later on. But it suggested to me that there are little voices that we need to pay attention to. And sometimes they're hard to hear, and sometimes other people don't hear them. But there are messages that we need to distill from the atmosphere around us, which can have significant impact on our lives. And perhaps our challenge then is to listen as carefully as we can.
Well, very, very nice. So next we had Bobby and Gladys, Kaf Aleph to Kaf Bet. You have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute. Unmute.
Gladys appointed me to be the spokesman for the Chavrusa. The stickle we had, the Mishnah starts out with, on what occasions do you declare a tanis? And our section was about dever, pestilence. So it starts with a little story about dever. And the criteria is, well, if you have this percentage of the population dying in a certain amount of time, then you declare it the tanis, otherwise you don't, etc., etc. And the Gemara quickly veers off to Agadata and stories, which basically have to do with chesed. And I won't go through them all, but actually, since I have an esteemed audience here, I'm going to leave you with a question. So the end of this section talks about hold on it. Rabbi Brocha Chaza'ah, a fellow named Rabbi Brocha Chaza'ah, and he's in the shuk and he meets Eliyahu Hanavi. So I'll leave it to you what that really means. There's a lot of Eliyahu Hanavi stories here. And Eliyahu Hanavi says, as they're passing by somebody, he says, Eliyahu says to Rabbi Chaza'ah, Brocha, these people are worthy for Olam Haba. And so he goes to the fellow, Rabbi Chazar Baruch says, well, what do you do? And
What's your occupation?
What's your occupation? So he says, I'm a prison guard. I imprison men separately from women, etc., etc. When I see it, and I protect the women from being in prison from being set upon by the goyim. Once when he saw a goy setting eyes on a Jewish prisoner, I'm sorry, on a female Jewish prisoner, he threw the dregs of wine on her dress, so it looked like she was menstruating. Fine, end of story. Okay. this fellow also had originally he stood out was he had black shoes and no tzitzis. And then he asked him, why do you wear black shoes? Everybody else wears white shoes or different shoes, and everybody else has tzitzis. And he said he circulates among the goyim, and when he finds out there's a gzeira on the Jews, he goes back to the Rabbanan that they'll pray for them. Good. End of that story. Good. So then he sees two other guys. Eliyahu sees two other people, and he says to Rabbi Chazar Braka, these fellows are also worthy of Olam Haba. Oh. So Rabbi Chazar Braka says, what's your occupation? And they give him two answers. Well, one is we're batchanim. We're jesters. We cheer people up. Then it says, Inami, when we see two people who are quarreling among themselves, we make peace between them. We strive to make peace. That essentially is the end of the story. So that's why they're worthy of Olam Haba. So I will just point out that Rashi on the second story says, Shehein devarim sha'adam ochel peroseihem ba'olam hazeh va'akeren kayemes le'olam haba havas shalom bein adam lachavero, which is wonderful. So that's worthy of Olam Haba. However, and I'll leave this question open, Rashi does not make that comment on the first story where Eliyahu said they're worthy of Olam Haba. So anybody who has an answer, you can write me, talk to me in shul. But that's those are essentially the stories of Chesed and Hava Shalom that in our Shtickle Gemara.
Very nice. I like that we get a question so we can work on it. So unfortunately, I have to go now because I was budgeting 25 minutes. So we'll try to keep our meeting to like half an hour. I mean, we can also, if we decide that it's longer, it's longer. It's fine with me. It's just right now I have to go, and we have Michael and Rabbi Kenigsberg who are left. I just wanted to tell people that I was talking to Rabbi Kenigsberg today, and we decided to do Rosh Hashanah next, Masechet Rosh Hashanah. So I already split up the pages for next week, which I'll send out to everyone. And thank you so much. And I'll let Rabbi Kenigsberg take over now. And I'm really sorry that I have to leave before the end.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Michael, over to you. But you're on mute, so.
No better. I've been on so many Zooms today with my office. Anyway, it's nice to have two of my YU schoolmates on as well, Marty and Hillel. So, little reunion here. So I had Chaf Beis in the middle to Chaf Gimel in the middle. So of course I cheated a little by looking before, and I would have given if I had to follow what Mr. Wolf said, the exact same story, as far as who's a Ben Olam Haba, and Eliyahu Hanavi, was saying that these are the guys, and you would not think it's the answer, not an answer on what Mr. Wolf's question was, but it's basically saying don't be so judgmental. Don't judge a book by its cover, because these guys what really had the interest of either was the Jewish girls or, things like they wanted to do good things, but they didn't want to be identified as Jews because then they couldn't get over the information appropriately, and that's why he was not wearing tzitzit. And, so, the answer really is not to be judgmental on that. Now, I'm going to the daf that the two sides of the daf that I did. I also cheated and went a little ahead. And that's of course Choni Hamagel, which was left over for Rabbi Kenigsberg, which I won't get into, right? So because it was one line after the completion of my section, but you see that it's talking about the Geshamim Be'itam. The Geshamim Be'itam and things that were really, the Gemara addresses calamities of the Tzibur. Very appropriate for what we're going through now. Calamities of the Tzibur. And then the big calamity of the Tzibur was really things having to do with the lack of rain, too much rain, winds coming that would bring bad things, locusts, all kinds of things, are calamities of when you would fast and when maybe you would not fast, including the pestilence. And, brought to mind a little of Corona. I thought people were thinking about that during, our learning sessions as well. But one of the things we did see that Be'itam, which we say the Geshamim Be'itam. So Be'itam, they were saying, would be Tuesday night and Friday night. Why? Because if that's considered a bracha, Tuesday night they talk about maybe people didn't go out as much for various reasons. They bring shadim, they bring other reasons. And Friday night, of course, was Leil Shabbos. So it will rain twice a week. A lot of times things should be watered twice a week. So those were good things if it was the Geshamim Be'itam. It also talked about in the time of Shimon ben Shattach, a wonderful time, that when the people, when it would rain, it would rain, those times of the week, that was considered on Tuesday nights and Friday nights a big bracha. The same thing, even in the time of Hordus, it was considered a bad guy, the king, but yet in his beautification of the Beit HaMikdash, and the workers would work there, it would rain only in the evening so they could actually do the malacha and the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash during the day. So that was considered also a bracha. So we should only be zocher to have all brachas that benefit the tzibur in our time as well. So that's it.
Amen.
Amen. Yeshar koach. Thank you. Thanks. So I'll just wrap it up. Keep it short as well. You mentioned the next stuff talking about Choni Hamagel, so number of famous stories about Choni Hamagel. I think that's one of the things we can say is famous. I think that's more or less safe to say. But so there's a story, of course, of the Choni drawing the circle on the ground and davening for the rain, Shemim Beitam. But following that, there's another story of which is also I think quite well known, where it says Amar Rabbi Yochanan that his entire life, Choni, was there was a pasuk he couldn't understand. It says and this is referring to when we go back. So if you understand that this referring to going back of the first galut, so 70 years, since we go back, we're like dreamers. So Choni said, how can it be that a person is dreaming for 70 years? For 70 years, a person is asleep. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack here in this Agarata. I don't think when we look at it, we assume that we have to understand the pasuk literally, that somebody is literally dreaming for 70 years. But nonetheless, that is how Choni says it, and he is sort of essentially taught a lesson, and then he falls asleep and he sleeps for 70 years, right? The famous story here with we sees the person who's planting the carob tree, and then he wakes up and he sees many generations later, and he says to him, why are you planting this? You're never going to be able to benefit from it. The person says, no, it's not for me, but it's for my descendants and their descendants. They will ultimately benefit from this. So I saw in the name of the Gra, again, there's a lot to unpack here. But this idea of 70 years, we know the number 70 always represents the years of a person's life. We see that in Tehillim. It's an idea of nowadays, thankfully, people are able to live for a lot longer. But 70 years represents an entire life. It represents fullness of one's existence. And Choni essentially is asking the question: can it be that a person is sleeping for 70 years? Can it be that a person's entire life is dedicated to things which are meaningless? You're sleeping, you're dreaming, essentially. And when he sees the answer of a person who is not dreaming, when a person is thinking about not just what's happening in the here and now, but what I'm doing, how is that going to leave an effect? How is that going to create an effect perhaps in Olam Haba? How is that going to leave an effect perhaps in this world after I'm gone? For those that come later, that is what is true and what is meaningful. And it's the idea of thinking about the long-term consequences, thinking about the eternal consequences of the things that we do. And in that way, we are able to hopefully go through our lives, not just sleeping, not just dreaming, but very much awake and very much leaving a meaningful impact. So that was something. Thanks to everybody for participating, for learning, for sharing of the learning. I want to thank Aaron again. I mean, in his absence, but he was the one who really came up with this program. It's one thing, everybody's learning their daf by themselves, and we'll get the Siyum and we get the extra dapim learned, which is wonderful. But to be able to actually learn from each other and share from each other as well, that really adds an extra level to this. You go back to what I was talking about between Mincha Mariv, the level of community as well. So Yesher Koach. Thank you to everyone. The new dapim will come out probably tomorrow or Motzei Shabbat in an email, and I think we'll keep it the same time, same place next week.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.